Evelyn Parker lived a life that seemed ordinary from the outside, but inside, it was quietly lonely. She had a good job at a small design studio in Portland, Oregon, and a comfortable home in a peaceful neighborhood. Yet, despite having a husband, Mark, and a stable life, Evelyn felt invisible in her own home. Mark traveled frequently for work, and when he was around, he was distant, always absorbed in his laptop or phone, leaving her to her own company. Nights were the hardest. When the silence in her house pressed against her like a weight she couldn't lift, across the street lived Daniel Reed. He was a quiet man in his early 40s, recently separated, and seemed to carry a similar heaviness in his own life. His house was neat but lacked warmth, giving off the feeling of someone waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. Daniel was not the type to talk to neighbors often. He kept to himself, walking his dog in the mornings and evenings, and spending long hours in his home office. But despite his reserved nature, there was something magnetic about him, something that made people notice him without realizing it. Their first interaction was casual, a polite wave across the street, a brief conversation near the mailbox. It was harmless and friendly, the kind of neighborly gestures most people ignored. But Evelyn found herself noticing him more than she should. She started timing her watering and gardening to coincide with his walks. She found excuses to glance out the window, catching sight of him trimming his plants or carrying groceries inside. Daniel, too, began to notice Evelyn in ways he hadn't expected. Her presence had a calm, subtle energy that made his evenings feel lighter. Even in the quiet of his lonely house, one rainy evening marked the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. Evelyn's power went out unexpectedly. She had been sitting on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the gray sky and listening to the rain tap against the roof. Through the blur of rain, she saw a familiar figure across the street. Daniel was standing on his porch, holding an umbrella, looking right at her. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. The noise of the storm, the distant cars, even the worry she carried all faded. He gave her a small, reassuring wave. Then she felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. That night, Evelyn realized that she looked forward to seeing him. It wasn't romantic at first, not in the traditional sense, but there was a pull she couldn't explain. Seeing Daniel became a highlight in the otherwise dull rhythm of her evenings. Their next few encounters were brief but meaningful. A nod here, a small wave there, a casual conversation about the weather. But with each interaction, a quiet understanding grew between them. They shared glances that lingered just a second too long, smiles that carried more than politeness, and silences that spoke volumes. Evelyn tried to push it away. She reminded herself that she was married, that Mark deserved her loyalty, and that what she felt was nothing more than a fleeting distraction. But the pull was strong, almost magnetic. Daniel was not flirtatious or forward. He was simply present, attentive, and genuine. In her life, where most people were too busy or too distracted, he was different. He made her feel seen, heard, and valued. One evening, the tension between curiosity and restraint reached a peak. The storm had returned fiercer than before, and Evelyn stood by her window watching the rain pour over Daniel's porch. He seemed to notice her gaze immediately and returned it with an expression that was both gentle and knowing. It wasn't a look of temptation or desire, it was a recognition of shared loneliness. A silent acknowledgement that each of them had noticed the other in ways that went deeper than polite neighborly interaction. Evelyn's heart raced, though she didn't fully understand why. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. She felt the stirrings of something forbidden yet pure. The world outside her window had shrunk to the space between their two homes, the rain acting as a curtain that made their connection feel private, intimate, and almost sacred. She knew she shouldn't let herself dwell on it. She knew this was the start of something complicated, possibly dangerous to the life she had built, yet the more she tried to resist, the more her thoughts returned to Daniel. From that night, a new routine emerged, almost without them realizing it. Evelyn began to anticipate the moments she might see him, his silhouette through the rain, the faint light of his porch lamp, the way he moved when he thought no one was watching. Daniel, too, seemed to adapt to this quiet ritual. He adjusted his walks, his evenings, to coincide with the moments when Evelyn might be outside or near her window. Each glance carried more weight than the last, each brief conversation more meaning than it seemed. It was subtle, a slow burn of connection that neither could fully explain. Their relationship hadn't progressed to words of affection or physical closeness, yet the emotional tension was palpable. Every interaction was charged with the electricity of shared understanding. They were two people who had recognized something vital in each other's mirror of loneliness, longing, and the need to feel alive again. Even as Evelyn tried to remain rational, even as she told herself to focus on her marriage, she found herself returning to the window, drawn by the invisible thread connecting her to Daniel. The neighborhood around them continued its quiet rhythm, the distant sound of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft hum of streetlights. But in that small stretch of street between their homes, a story was beginning, silent and unseen by anyone else. The beauty of this connection was in its restraint. Daniel never crossed boundaries, never pressed too far, yet their moments together were charged with emotion. It was as though they had discovered a secret language in their glances, her smiles, the small gestures that carried more meaning than words ever could. Evelyn felt a rush of life she hadn't realized she'd been missing. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt awake, even if just for a moment. In the quiet of the rain-soaked evening, by the end of that first week, Evelyn knew something had changed. She couldn't explain it, and she couldn't control it. Every time she looked across the street, she felt a tension in her chest, a yearning she didn't fully understand. It wasn't about wrongdoing. It was about connection, about the human need to be seen and understood. Daniel had become a presence she couldn't ignore, quiet force in her life that tugged at her heart, and though she didn't know what the future held, she sensed that this was only the beginning. Something powerful had started, delicate yet undeniable. A story unfolding in silence and rain. In the space between two homes and two hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected way. After that first night in the rain, something between Evelyn and Daniel shifted, though neither of them spoke about it openly. The small gestures continued, waves from across the street, brief conversations by the mailbox, smiles exchanged while passing on the sidewalk, but now there was an unspoken weight behind every glance. Every encounter carried a hint of longing, a quiet electricity neither had expected to feel. Evelyn began to notice things about him she hadn't before. The way his lips curved when he smiled at her, the quiet patience in his movements, the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke. Daniel, too, found himself studying her without realizing it, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, the gentle way she arranged her garden in the evening light. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition, sense of seeing someone in their full depth and being seen back in return. The days passed quickly, but the moments they shared seemed to slow time down. One morning, Evelyn left her house earlier than usual and spotted Daniel walking his dog. They stopped at the corner, pretending to talk casually about the weather, but the conversation soon deepened. She mentioned how lonely her evenings had become, how silence at home sometimes felt heavier than words could carry. Daniel nodded, admitting that he often felt the same, that the quiet of his own house had grown unbearable. There was a raw honesty in his words that made her heart ache and her chest tighten at the same time. It didn't take long for their brief encounters to turn into intentional meetings. One chilly evening, Daniel invited Evelyn to step inside his house for a cup of tea. The invitation felt dangerous, and she hesitated, knowing she should decline. But something in her pushed her forward. The warmth of his home, the soft lighting, the quiet hum of the kettle boiling, it all felt like a refuge from the loneliness she carried. They talked for hours, and for the first time in months, Evelyn felt completely understood. The conversation flowed effortlessly. She spoke about her life, about dreams that had been set aside, about the quiet yearning for connection. He shared fragments of his own story, his separation, his regrets, the weight of being alone after so many years. There was no judgment, no expectation, just two people opening their hearts in a way they hadn't dared to with anyone else. Their hands brushed occasionally, unplanned, and each time, the contact left a lingering warmth, a reminder that their bond was growing stronger. Evelyn tried to rationalize it. She reminded herself that she was married, that Mark deserved her attention, that what she felt could be dangerous if pursued. But rational thoughts were no match for the emotional pull she felt toward Daniel. Being around him was like stepping into sunlight after months of gray skies. He made her feel alive, like the loneliness she had been carrying for years had finally found a mirror that understood it. Daniel felt it too. He didn't push, didn't try to manipulate or coax her. He simply existed in a way that made Evelyn want to exist more fully herself. And yet the awareness of the line they were crossing lingered in the back of their minds. Both knew that while their connection wasn't physical in the explicit sense, it was a secretive emotional intimacy that could ripple outward and change everything if discovered. Evenings became their sanctuary. Sometimes they would meet under the pretense of casual walks, sometimes for tea, sometimes simply to sit together and watch the sunset from his living room. The streetlights outside cast soft patterns across the room, creating an atmosphere of quiet calm. They shared jokes, stories, fears, and hopes, little pieces of themselves that had never been offered to anyone else. Each conversation left them feeling lighter, yet heavier at the same time. Aware that their growing closeness was built on a fragile foundation of secrecy. The beauty of their bond lay in its subtlety. There were no dramatic gestures, no declarations of love shouted into the night. Only the soft, steady build of trust and understanding. Evelyn realized she was beginning to look forward to these evenings more than she should. Her mind wandered to Daniel during the day, replaying snippets of their conversations, imagining his smile, feeling a pulse of warmth that was difficult to ignore. She started planning her evenings around the possibility of seeing him. Whether that meant adjusting her gardening schedule or pretending to check the mail at the right time. Daniel's feelings mirrored hers. He found himself lingering at his window, hoping for a glimpse of her, or adjusting his walks to coincide with hers. He had not anticipated that a casual connection with a neighbor could grow so deeply. Yet here he was, waiting for the moments when their lives intersected. There was a tension between them, a mixture of excitement and guilt that neither could fully escape. Each interaction was charged with emotion, a delicate balance of wanting more and knowing they had to restrain themselves. As weeks passed, their secret evenings became a routine, unspoken but understood. They would meet at Daniel's house or under the streetlights, sharing conversation and quiet companionship. Each moment was filled with emotion, sometimes laughter, sometimes silence. Always a sense of understanding that went deeper than words could convey. They discovered common interests, shared dreams, and even little fears that they had never told anyone else. The bond that had started with glances across the street had grown into something substantial. Intimate and undeniable, Evelyn began to notice changes in herself. She felt more alive, more aware of her emotions, more willing to express what she had kept hidden. Daniel had a similar effect on him. His days felt lighter, his evenings warmer. His solitude softened by the presence of someone who understood him completely. It was a relationship built on emotional connection, on shared understanding, and on the quiet thrill of secrecy. Despite the growing intensity, they never crossed the line into anything inappropriate. There were no physical acts that could cause scandal. It's only emotional closeness that made the heart ache and the mind question boundaries. Both were aware of the consequences if discovered, yet neither wanted to stop the connection entirely. They were addicted not to each other's bodies, but to each other's presence, to the way they made each other feel alive and understood in a world that often seemed indifferent. One night, Evelyn stood at her window again, looking across the street at Daniel's porch. Rain had returned, soft and steady, tapping against the roof and windows. Daniel's light was on, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. No words were exchanged, but everything was said. In that quiet moment, the emotional intensity of their secret bond was undeniable. They didn't touch, they didn't speak. Yet their hearts communicated in ways words could never capture. Evelyn knew she was falling into a complicated tour. Evelyn knew she was falling into a key, Like, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring. And we fall known to him leave. They didn't touch, we didn't touch, they didn't speak. Yet there are 6 Ks. We would be 6 cloak by 6.x quo. Evelyn no 6 Evelyn lead to sept to an a quo to 6 8 kfaay. Kali with kawal we would kikid you to kasi to we sef k we like k sever sek a k we sakai to you say we said kakara krai se kagada you get it I kari kak I kuta you to ka I kek with the quit tik yeah eight where go with you emotional territory, but the draw was irresistible. Daniel was not just a neighbor. He had become a mirror to her own soul, reflecting parts of herself she had forgotten existed. And Daniel, in turn, found in her a warmth and understanding that had been absent from his life since his separation. The evenings continued, Cage meeting a mixture of comfort and tension, warmth and guilt. They were careful, respectful, and deeply aware of boundaries. Yet the emotional intimacy grew with every interaction. Their connection had become a quiet, unspoken part of both their lives, an invisible thread tying them together in the calm and solitude of the neighborhood streets. By the end of the part, Evelyn and Daniel had reached a point where the bond between them was undeniable. It wasn't a traditional romance, not yet, but it was deeply meaningful. They were drawn to each other not by temptation or lust, but by understanding, empathy, and the subtle thrill of being noticed and valued in a world that often overlooked them. Each evening they spent together left them both changed, more aware of their emotions and more connected to the fragile, delicate world of human intimacy, even as they parted each night. There was a lingering sense that this connection was just beginning. It was a quiet, emotional journey, one filled with tension, longing, and the bittersweet reality that something so profound could exist without words, without declarations, and yet without diminishing insignificance. Weeks passed since Evelyn and Daniel had begun their secret emotional connection, and the tension between them grew in ways neither could ignore. The neighborhood seemed smaller now, every glance across the street charged with meaning. They had established their private rhythm morning walks, evening talks, shared moments under the soft glow of streetlights, but reality was never far behind. Evelyn felt the weight of her marriage pressing on her. Mark was back more often now, returning from his business trips with a calm efficiency that masked his subtle observations. He noticed small changes, her distant expressions, her quiet smiles when she thought he wasn't looking, her subtle restlessness. He didn't ask questions, but his attention added a layer of guilt to the longing she felt for Daniel. Daniel, on the other hand, began to feel the strain of their secrecy. He loved the moments with Evelyn, but he understood that the emotional intimacy they shared existed in a fragile space. A space that could be disrupted if anyone discovered the depth of their bond. He found himself lingering on her porch longer than usual, hesitating to leave, afraid that stepping away would make the connection fade. Every conversation, every smile, every glance had become heavier with meaning, and both of them were silently aware that their routine could not continue forever without consequences. Despite the tension, the magnetic pull between them refused to fade. One afternoon, Evelyn decided to take a walk in the nearby park, pretending to enjoy the fall colors while her mind was fully occupied with Daniel. She walked past the familiar streets, past houses that had never seemed so alive, and finally found herself at the corner where Daniel usually ended his dog walks. And there he was, waiting. Their meeting wasn't planned in words, yet it felt inevitable, as though some invisible force guided them together. They spoke casually at first, as if nothing had changed, but the conversation quickly deepened. Evelyn admitted the emptiness she felt at home, the quiet ache that had been growing for years. Daniel shared his own solitude, the lingering sadness of a separation that had left him unexpectedly alone. The emotional intensity was palpable, the air between them almost electric. They laughed softly at small jokes, paused at moments of silence that felt heavier than words. and lingered in each other's company without needing explanations. Every glance held an unspoken question. Every pause a shared understanding that could not be voiced aloud. Evenings became more complicated. Evelyn would return home feeling both exhilarated and guilty, her mind replaying every detail of their conversations, every brush of hands, every shared laugh. Mark noticed her distance and remarked casually, "You've seemed different lately. Is everything okay?" Evelyn's throat tightened. How could she explain a connection that existed only in quiet moments, only in the small spaces between glances? She smiled, said she was fine, but the truth stayed locked inside her heart. She didn't want to hurt him. But she also couldn't ignore the life she felt stirring across the street with Daniel. Daniel tried to maintain his distance, walking his dog at different times, focusing on work, attempting to create boundaries. But their emotional gravity pulled them back together again and again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the street, Evelyn caught his eye from her porch. He stopped mid-step, and without a word they acknowledged the unspoken bond between them. That silent recognition carried more meaning than hours of conversation could have, and both felt the intensity of it. Pressing on their hearts, the unspoken reality of their connection became even more apparent when rumors began to surface. Neighbors noticed the frequency of their meetings, the long conversations, the shared laughter. Whispers followed them, subtle glances that made Evelyn suddenly aware of how visible her emotions were. The fear of discovery crept into her mind, tightening her chest with each passing day. It wasn't the concern of scandal. It was the fear of losing the one place of understanding she had found in Daniel. The emotional intimacy they shared was a lifeline, fragile and beautiful. And the thought of its exposure made her anxious and restless. Daniel noticed the change in her demeanor. She seemed more cautious, more hesitant, as if aware of the world's gaze pressing in. He approached her one evening under the dim streetlights, gently asking, "Are we overstepping?" The question, simple in words, carried the weight of everything between them. Evelyn shook her head, tears threatening her eyes. "I don't know. I don't want to stop. But I don't know how to keep going like this either." Their hands met briefly, lingering for a heartbeat longer than they should have. And the quiet tension between them escalated. They began meeting in shorter bursts, carefully avoiding long interactions that might draw attention. But each encounter carried more intensity because of its brevity. They laughed more, spoke more earnestly, and soaked up the moments as if they were precious treasures. Every word, every glance, every soft pause was magnified by the knowledge that their bond was delicate, fragile, and beautiful. Evelyn felt herself falling further, even as she fought the guilt that accompanied every heartbeat when she thought of Daniel. Their evenings together were no longer just casual talks. They became an emotional refuge. Evelyn would sit with Daniel in his living room, sipping tea, sharing stories of her childhood, and revealing dreams she had long forgotten. Daniel, in turn, opened up about fears, regrets, and quiet hopes. They didn't need physical closeness to feel deeply connected. Their emotional intimacy was enough to make the heart race, to make the soul feel lighter, to make the world outside momentarily disappear. Even when apart, they existed in each other's thoughts. Evelyn found herself noticing the smallest signs of Daniel in her day, the way a certain street looked when the sun hit it, the sound of a dog's bark that reminded her of his morning walks, the gentle pull in her chest whenever she imagined his smile. Daniel felt similarly, replaying their conversations in his mind, imagining her laughter, wondering what she was thinking at any given moment. Their connection had become a quiet obsession, not in a harmful way, but in a way that consumed their emotions and heightened the intensity of their secret bond. Yet, the awareness of boundaries and consequences never fully left them. They both understood the line they could not cross, the potential impact on their lives and the lives of those around them. Their relationship existed in a suspended state, a delicate dance between longing and restraint. It was exhilarating, emotionally charged, and frightening all at once. Every encounter was a choice, every glance a decision. And every shared moment carried the weight of both joy and risk. As weeks turned into months, Evelyn realized that her connection with Daniel had transformed her. She felt more alive, more aware of her emotions, and more willing to face the complexities of her life. She had learned that emotional intimacy could exist outside traditional boundaries. That connection didn't always require ownership or permanence, and that being seen and understood was a powerful force. Daniel had changed as well. He was lighter in spirit, more open to life's small pleasures, and deeply grateful for the rare bond he had discovered with Evelyn. One evening, as the sun set and the streetlights flickered on, Evelyn and Daniel met on their usual corner. They stood apart, but their eyes locked with the familiarity of countless shared moments. Neither spoke at first, but the air between them was thick with unspoken emotion. Finally, Daniel said softly, "We can't ignore this anymore, can we?" Evelyn shook her head, a quiet acknowledgement that neither could walk away, not yet, not completely. Their emotional bond had grown beyond casual neighborly connection. It had become a part of their lives, a presence that could not be denied. In that moment, they both understood that the world outside the neighborhood, their homes, their responsibilities could never fully touch what existed between them. Their secret evenings were a refuge, a place where hearts could speak without words, and souls could find recognition without explanation. They knew challenges lay ahead, that their bond was delicate and could be disrupted at any moment. But for now, they existed fully in the connection they had created, aware of the beauty, the intensity, and the fragility of what they shared. And so, their secret continued, a mixture of joy, tension, and longing as they navigated the complexities of emotions, the risks of discovery, and the undeniable pull of hearts that had found each other when they least expected it. It was a story of human connection, emotional intimacy, and the quiet thrill of being seen, understood, and cherished in the most unexpected of places. Time moved quickly, but Evelyn and Daniel both knew their secret connection could not last forever. The bond they had formed over weeks of quiet, emotional intimacy had become the most vivid part of their lives. Yet the reality of responsibilities and commitments lingered in the back of their minds. Evelyn's marriage, fragile though it was, required her attention. Mark's presence had become more consistent, and although he remained somewhat distant, the awareness of her husband's feelings began to weigh heavily on her conscience. She knew she had to make a decision, one that would honor both her own heart and the life she had built. Daniel understood this as well. Their moments together were precious and rare, a sanctuary of shared laughter, quiet conversation, and unspoken understanding. But he also knew that their bond, intense as it was, existed in a space of fragility. If it continued unchecked, it could bring pain and complications into both their lives. Despite the emotional pull between them, he respected Evelyn too much to let the connection continue indefinitely without boundaries. They had discovered something extraordinary, but extraordinary things often came with difficult choices. One late evening, as the sky turned a deep indigo and the first stars appeared, Evelyn and Daniel met beneath the old oak tree at the corner of their street. The tree had become their unspoken meeting place, a witness to countless small moments, shared smiles, and confessions of longing. They both arrived in silence, neither wanting to speak first, both aware that this meeting would mark a turning point. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind seemed to echo the tension in the air. Carrying a quiet reminder of all the evenings they had spent together, Daniel was the first to break the silence. "We can't keep doing this," he said softly, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling beneath the surface. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. She had known this moment would come, yet the finality of it made her heart ache. "I know," she whispered, "but I don't know how to let go completely. I don't want to lose this. Us." The words hung between them, heavy with emotion, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside the tree and the quiet street had ceased to exist. They talked openly, honestly, without holding back. Evelyn shared her fears of hurting Mark, of losing herself, of letting go of something that had awakened emotions she hadn't felt in years. Daniel confessed his own worries, his fear of attachment. His struggle with stepping away from a bond that had brought so much warmth into his life. They laughed softly at shared memories, smiled through tears, and held on to the comforting presence of each other without crossing any lines. Every glance, every sigh, every soft pause carried the weight of their emotions. A silent acknowledgement of the love and connection that had grown between them. Evelyn felt the reality of the situation pressing on her. She loved the way Daniel made her feel alive, seen, and understood. But she also loved the life she had built and the responsibilities she carried. She realized that true strength lay not in clinging to fleeting happiness, but in making difficult choices with courage. "We found each other at the wrong time," she said, voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean it wasn't real. And I'll carry this, all of it, with me, always." Daniel nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes, understanding fully. Their connection had been real, profound, and transformative, and it would leave a lasting mark on both their hearts. They spent the evening walking slowly beneath the oak tree, tracing the familiar paths of their meetings. Every word was deliberate, every touch fleeting, every glance full of unspoken emotion. They held on to each other's presence for as long as possible, knowing that soon they would have to step away. There was no bitterness, no anger, only a deep, abiding appreciation for the rare and meaningful bond they had. Discovered. Evelyn realized that love did not always mean possession. That connection did not always require constant proximity, and that emotional intimacy could exist without breaking the boundaries of morality or integrity. She understood that the feelings she shared with Daniel were not a betrayal in the heart of their essence. They were an expression of human need, of longing, of the search for understanding and companionship. Daniel, too, understood that letting go did not diminish what they had. Their bond had changed them, and that transformation could not be undone. As the night deepened, they lingered beneath the oak tree one last time. Daniel looked at Evelyn and said softly, "Some people enter your life to teach you something, to remind you what it feels like to be truly seen. That's what we had." Evelyn nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And I will never forget it. You reminded me of who I am, and that is a gift I will always carry." They shared a quiet, lingering hug, careful to honor the boundaries they had maintained throughout their connection. It was a hug filled with gratitude, with sorrow, with love that was neither reckless nor harmful, but deeply human. After parting, Evelyn returned home, her heart heavy but full. She felt a mixture of loss and hope, knowing that she had experienced something extraordinary, something rare, something that would shape the rest of her life. Daniel returned to his house across the street, a quiet ache in his chest, yet a sense of peace as well. They had loved and been loved, had understood and been understood, and that was enough. Their secret had been a chapter of life, intense and transformative. And now it was time to let the story live in memory rather than in daily reality. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Evelyn devoted herself to her marriage with renewed awareness and care, understanding that love and attention required conscious effort. She carried the lessons from her connection with Daniel, the importance of being seen, the value of understanding, and the beauty of emotional intimacy into her daily life. She noticed small joys more deeply, appreciated moments of connection, and felt a greater sense of empathy for those around her. Daniel moved forward as well, embracing the world with a renewed sense of hope and emotional clarity. He remained grateful for the bond he had shared with Evelyn, knowing that it had awakened parts of him that had been dormant for too long. He walked through his days with an understanding that some relationships exist not to last forever, but to leave a lasting imprint on the heart. Occasionally, Evelyn would glance across the street, catching a flicker of familiarity, a shadow of memory in the window of Daniel's house. It was not longing in the painful sense, but a quiet acknowledgement of what had been. A gentle smile at a memory that was both beautiful and bittersweet. And Daniel, from his side, sometimes paused in his evening routine, remembering the warmth of shared laughter, the weight of quiet understanding, and the extraordinary human connection that had touched him so profoundly. Their story ended not with regret or bitterness, but with a sense of completion. They had discovered something rare and meaningful, something that transcended everyday life. And they had honored it by carrying it forward with grace, without destroying the lives around them. It was a story of longing, of connection, of emotional growth, and of the quiet power of human understanding. Even as life moved on, the memory of their bond remained alive. A quiet testament to the power of being seen, the beauty of shared moments, and the bittersweet reality that some connections, though brief and secret, are never truly lost. Evelyn and Daniel had loved in their own way, had grown together without crossing boundaries, and had stepped apart with dignity, leaving behind a story of human intimacy, respect, and emotional truth. And so, beneath the quiet streets of their neighborhood, beneath the familiar windows and the gentle glow of porch lights, the echoes of their connection lingered, a reminder that some bonds are meant to be cherished in memory, to be felt deeply in the heart, and to remain forever a part of who we are. It was not an ending in sadness, but an ending in love, subtle, enduring, and profoundly human.